In 1943, following the brutal battles at the Kursk Bulge, a German officer responsible for training assault gun crews traveled to the front. He was tasked with gathering feedback from commanders who had just survived the largest tank battle in history. This is what he heard. One high-ranking commander stated he would prefer a battalion of assault guns over an entire panzer division. A regiment commander expressed it even more specifically, saying that 2 assault self-propelled guns were more valuable to him than 10 tanks. In that same report, it is written in black and white that the assault gun became perhaps the most valuable weapon in the summer battles of 1943. And he was not talking about the fearsome Tiger, nor the elegant Panther, but about a low-slung, unremarkable machine that cost almost half as much as a conventional tank. This machine was called the Sturmgeschütz III, and it became Germany's most mass-produced armored vehicle of the entire Second World War. More than 10,000 units rolled off factory assembly lines, and these machines fought from the first to the last day of the war. But to understand where it came from and why it proved so effective, one must go back several decades. The First World War changed the nature of combat forever. With the advent of machine guns, any infantry attack turned into a true meat grinder where companies and battalions fell entirely without advancing even 100 meters. A machine gun nest, a fortified bunker, a gun firing over open sights. All of this made an offensive suicidal. Destroying such targets with conventional artillery was extremely difficult. High projectile dispersion, long fire adjustment times, and the constant risk of hitting one's own troops. Then the Germans found a way out. Along with the attacking infantry, artillerymen moved forward, manually pushing their guns to destroy the most dangerous targets with direct fire. The tactic proved brilliant. But these assault gun crews suffered catastrophic losses because the enemy sought to knock them out first. That is why only volunteers were recruited for the crews, and these men commanded immense respect in the army. Years passed, and in 1935, General Erich von Manstein prepared a memorandum for the Chief of the General Staff. In it, he detailed the necessity of creating armored self-propelled assault guns that were to be part of infantry units at a rate of 1 battalion per division. The idea was simple and elegant. Take the proven tactics of the First World War, but provide the artillerymen with armor protection and a motor so they could not only survive under fire, but also keep pace with the infantry. The High Command, represented by Generals von Fritsch and Beck, supported the idea, and work began. In early 1937, the Daimler-Benz firm produced the first prototype based on the promising Panzer III tank, which subsequently proved itself to be an exceptionally reliable platform. The vehicle received a short-barreled 75mm gun with a length of 24 calibers. The ballistics of this weapon were ideal for infantry support. Shells flew along a high arcing trajectory, and even if they missed, landed very close to the target, striking it with high explosive fragmentation. They could fly directly into trenches and ditches, destroying what was unreachable for flat trajectory fire. Comparative tests were conducted at a firing range where the assault gun fired side by side with a Panzer IV tank armed with the exact same gun. The result surprised many. The self-propelled gun proved significantly more accurate than the tank. The absence of a rotating turret made the structure more rigid, and the low silhouette reduced vibrations during firing. However, a serious dispute broke out between tankers and artillerymen over who should own the new machines. Tankers believed that any armored vehicle was their domain. Artillerymen insisted that an assault gun is a gun, and therefore its place was in the artillery. The artillerymen won. But due to these prolonged disputes, serial production was delayed for a long time. The new vehicle lacked a rotating turret, and the designers used the saved weight to reinforce the frontal armor, bringing it to 50 millimeters. For the late 30s, this was excellent protection, surpassing the armor of most German tanks of that time. The crew consisted of 4 people, a commander, a driver, a gunner, and a loader. Following the tradition inherited from the First World War, crews were recruited only from volunteers who passed the strictest selection. They were the best of the best, and they received higher quality training than ordinary tankers and artillerymen. Assault self-propelled guns became the elite of the German armed forces from the very beginning. Serial production began in 1940 and did not stop until the very end of the war. Over these years, more than 10,000 machines rolled off factory assembly lines. At the same time, the cost of one self-propelled gun was about 82,500 Reichsmarks, whereas the Panzer III tank, upon which it was based, cost the Treasury 103,000. Cheaper, simpler to produce, more accurate in firing, and better protected. It was this combination that made the machine so attractive to the command. Ahead lay real battles, and the very first one was to show what this modest-looking self-propelled gun was worth in a real engagement. The first combat vehicles to roll off the assembly line in 1940 received the Ausführung A modification designation. These were still fairly raw self-propelled guns, and already in the summer of that same year, the Ausführung B version appeared, in which engineers seriously reworked the transmission, widened the tracks to 40 centimeters, and installed new drive sprockets and idler wheels. The machine became more stable on soft ground and easier to handle on the march, which was of great importance for an assault gun tied to infantry. At the beginning of 1941, versions C and D appeared, which were practically indistinguishable from each other externally and differed only in internal changes. The main innovation of these modifications was visible from the outside. The sight was moved to the roof of the superstructure. In earlier versions, the sight was located in the frontal plate, creating a kind of shot trap. An enemy projectile hitting the area of the sight could jam it or penetrate the armor at a weakened point. Now this vulnerability was eliminated, and the gunner received a safer working position. In the autumn of 1941, when German troops on the Eastern Front had already faced the reality of Soviet armored vehicles, the Ausführung E version appeared. Designers abandoned the slanted placement of the 9mm side plates and replaced them with 30mm vertical walls. It might seem that vertical armor is worse than sloped armor, but the difference in thickness more than compensated for it. The machine became noticeably more resistant to fragments and fire from light anti-tank artillery, which formed the basis of Soviet anti-tank defense in the first year of the war. A true revolution occurred at the beginning of 1942 when the Ausführung F version went into production. Encounters with numerous Soviet K-F and T-34 tanks showed that the short-barreled gun could no longer handle the task of fighting enemy armor. The vehicle was rearmed with a long 75mm gun, 43 calibers in length, which radically changed the combat capabilities of the self-propelled gun. Simultaneously, the frontal armor was reinforced with 30mm add-on plates, bringing the total thickness to 80 millimeters. A fan appeared on the superstructure roof to exhaust propellant gases, and for protection against enemy infantry, a machine gun with a shield was added, because enemy infantrymen quickly realized that getting to the turretless, self-propelled gun from the side or rear was its weakest point. Very soon, the gun was replaced by an even more powerful one, already 48 calibers in length. This modification received the Ausführung F8 designation, and it became one of the most widespread versions of the entire war. The ammunition load was reduced to 44 rounds, but the increased power of the gun more than made up for this limitation. By the way, crews were officially allowed to load up to 120 shells if necessary, although this was, of course, overkill and turned the fighting compartment into a powder keg. At the beginning of 1943, the last major modification, version G, appeared. The superstructure was widened over the tracks, and the commander finally received a full-fledged cupola with 8 vision blocks, the front part of which opened separately to extend a periscopic binocular. The crews of many tanks of that time could envy such a view. and it was precisely the field of view on the battlefield that often decided who fires first and who never fires again. The poorly protected boxy gun mantlet was replaced with a cast, streamlined one, which soldiers nicknamed the pig's head for its characteristic shape. It was much better at deflecting enemy shells with ricochets. Anti-cumulative screens appeared on the sides, and the hull began to be covered with a special Zimmerit compound, which prevented the attachment of magnetic mines. Some vehicles received smoke mortars for laying screens, allowing them to quickly hide from enemy fire. The armor of these machines deserves a separate discussion. The 50mm and later 80mm frontal plates were heterogeneous, meaning non-uniform in structure. The outer side of the armor was hardened to a high hardness, reaching 588 units on the Brunel scale. Upon impact, this hard layer destroyed the core of the enemy projectile. But hard armor has an unpleasant property. It is prone to spalling and produces many secondary fragments inside the machine, which are dangerous for the crew. Therefore, the inner layer was made more viscous and ductile, and it suppressed these fragments. The technology was more expensive and complex, but such armor proved significantly stronger than ordinary homogeneous steel of the same thickness. For comparison, Soviet tanks used homogeneous armor, which had identical properties throughout the thickness of the plate. All standard penetration tables were compiled based on homogeneous steel, and therefore in practice, the crews of Soviet and Allied vehicles were often surprised why the frontal armor of the assault gun was not penetrated by a shell that, according to the table, should have gone straight through. At real combat distances, this armor remained vulnerable to American 76mm guns and Soviet 85mm guns and higher. But until these guns appeared in mass quantities, the third model assault gun felt quite confident on the battlefield. To understand what a formidable weapon this machine was, one must look at exactly how it fired and with what. Let us start with the early versions armed with the short-barreled gun 24 calibers in length. This weapon was created not for duels with tanks, but for destroying infantry targets, machine gun nests, guns firing over open sights, and field fortifications. Its accuracy was excellent. The probability of hitting with a fragmentation shell a target 2.5 meters wide and 2 meters high was 61% from 1,500 meters, 92% from a kilometer, and practically 100% at distances less than 1,000 meters. An armor-piercing shell flew even more accurately, 74% hits from 1.5 kilometers and 98% from 1,000 meters. However, there was a downside to this accuracy. The armor-piercing shell left the barrel with a muzzle velocity of only 385 meters per second. It flew relatively slowly, and at medium and long distances followed a noticeably high trajectory. This meant that the gunner had to make serious adjustments for range, and hitting a moving tank became a very difficult task. Laser rangefinders and electronic ballistic computers did not exist then, and the gunner determined the distance to the target by eye, orienting himself by the known sizes of enemy equipment. But if the target was camouflaged or the gunner did not know exactly what type of gun or tank was before him, estimating the distance was extremely hard. That is why effective fire from the short-barreled gun against armored targets was usually conducted at distances up to 800 meters. Armor penetration for the early versions was low, only 41 millimeters from 100 meters, 39 from 500, and 35 from a kilometer. Light Soviet T-26 and BT-7 tanks were destroyed fairly reliably if a hit was scored. Soviet 45mm anti-tank and tank guns, which armed the vast majority of these machines in 1941, could effectively fight the assault gun only from 100 meters. But T-34s and KVs were another matter entirely. Against them, cumulative shells were used. And here, interesting physics began. The cumulative grenade 38 had a muzzle velocity of 450 meters per second, noticeably higher than the armor-piercing shell, and penetrated 75 millimeters of armor regardless of distance. Against the sloped armor of the T-34, the cumulative worked in a paradoxical way. The shell, arriving from above on a high trajectory, met the slanted frontal plate at an angle close to the normal, and the armor, which deflected ordinary armor-piercing shells so well with ricochets, effectively presented itself to the cumulative jet. There was also another variant of cumulative ammunition, the Grenade 38 in several modifications, less accurate and with a weaker post-penetration effect, but providing many fragments capable of striking infantry. Crews usually carried this universal shell instead of a purely fragmentation one. The recommended ammunition load was distributed as follows: 12% armor-piercing, 65% fragmentation, and 23% smoke shells. But in practice, crews adjusted the load to specific situations, and official documents explicitly permitted taking more than the standard amount. Often, almost 2 full ammunition loads were packed into the machine, understanding that an extra dozen shells could save a life in a prolonged battle. When the long-barreled versions went into production in 1942, the picture changed radically. The gun 48 calibers in length turned the former infantry support weapon into a true tank hunter. At a distance of 1.5 kilometers, the armor-piercing shell showed 77% accuracy and penetrated 74 millimeters of armor. From a kilometer, the accuracy increased to 99%, and armor penetration was already 85 millimeters. A rare sub-caliber shell from a kilometer with 95% accuracy pierced 97 millimeters of steel. Cumulative ammunition consistently penetrated 100 millimeters at any distance, and its accuracy from 500 meters reached 100%. What did this mean in practice when fighting the enemy's heavy machines? The assault gun could effectively strike T-34s, starting from 800 meters, and penetrating the turret of an IS-2 was realistic from a kilometer and closer. But experienced crews preferred to let the enemy approach to 500 meters, where the probability of destruction with any type of shell became maximal. The IS-2 turret was cast, and cast armor is up to 20% weaker than rolled armor, so its nominal 100 millimeters actually equaled 80 to 90 millimeters of rolled steel. From 500 meters, the armor-piercing shell penetrated 96 millimeters, the cumulative 100, and the sub-caliber all 120. Of course, the assault gun lost to a heavy tank in protection, but its assets were its low silhouette, high rate of fire, and the ability to be the first to detect the enemy and the first to open fire. The baptism of fire took place in May and June of 1940, when Germany fell upon Belgium and France. At that moment, very few machines were in service, and they were all concentrated in a few units. Battery 640 joined the Infantry Regiment Deutschland and was renamed the 16th Assault Battery. Alongside it operated assault batteries 659, 660, and 665. These were the only units armed with the new self-propelled guns, and it was up to them to prove that Manstein's idea worked not only on paper. The result exceeded all expectations. The low-slung machines followed directly behind the advancing infantry, suppressing firing points with direct fire and clearing the way through fortified positions. In the report of the 16th Assault Battery, it was stated that the actions of the assault artillery in the very first battles won the hearts of the infantrymen. Soldiers, used to relying only on their own rifles and grenades when storming fortifications, saw for the first time an armored gun moving alongside them and destroying everything that hindered their advance. The French campaign ended swiftly, and assault self-propelled guns made their contribution to this victory, even if it was modest in scale for now. The true test began on June 22, 1941, when the Wehrmacht moved east. Assault guns entered battle with the Red Army from the first hours of the invasion, and immediately found themselves in completely different conditions. There were no neat European roads and compact distances here. Endless spaces, mud, fierce resistance, and armored vehicles that turned out to be more serious than many German commanders expected. But it was precisely on the Eastern Front that the third model assault gun truly revealed its potential. Let us trace this through the example of the 185th Assault Gun Battalion. From June 22nd to December 31st, 1941, this battalion destroyed or captured 64 heavy and medium guns, 66 light guns, 39 infantry guns, 34 mortars, 79 anti-tank guns, 45 anti-aircraft guns, 314 machine guns, 91 tanks, and 9 armored cars. For all this, 58,890 shells were expended. The battalion's losses amounted to 9 machines, of which 6 were destroyed by the enemy, and 3 were blown up by the crews themselves so they would not fall to the enemy. But the truly impressive statistics came at the beginning of 1942, when the same 185th Battalion operated in the period from February 20th to April 9th. During these incomplete 2 months, the unit recorded to its account 2 KV heavy tanks, 229 medium tanks, 127 T-34s, and more than 50 guns. The German counting system was quite strict. Only those machines that were clearly destroyed or caught fire were counted. A tank that had a track blown off or a drive wheel damaged was formally considered knocked out and out of the battle, but did not enter the victory statistics, so the real number of enemy machines put out of action could be significantly higher. During this period, the battalion suffered 8 self-propelled guns lost for good, 11 people died, and 23 were wounded. Ammunition consumption was 12,700 fragmentation shells, 5,120 armor-piercing, and 1,360 cumulative. These figures clearly show that even the short-barreled version, which many are inclined to consider weak against Soviet tanks, proved to be a lethal tool in skilled hands. But one must also remember the context. At the beginning of the war, Soviet tanks had very poor visibility. By no means were all equipped with radio stations, and most of those that had radios worked only for reception. A low-slung, self-propelled gun with a low silhouette was an extremely difficult target for a tanker who could barely see the battlefield through narrow slits and murky optics. By 1943, the machine was being delivered not only to infantry units, but also to tank units, where battalions and regiments of mixed composition were formed. It was then that German intelligence intercepted an order from the Soviet command, according to which Red Army tankers were forbidden from engaging in direct combat with assault guns. This document speaks eloquently of the reputation this machine earned on the Eastern Front. Large-scale statistics confirmed individual successes. From January to August 1944, the Germans lost 713 assault guns for good, while claiming 4,667 knocked-out Soviet tanks. Even if one divides this number in half, adjusting for inaccuracies and possible exaggerations, the result remains impressive. The dynamics of losses depending on the nature of the fighting are also interesting. On the Western Front, in defensive battles from June to September 1944, the Germans lost 68% of their tanks and only 23% of their assault guns. But when the defense collapsed and chaotic retreats began, in October and November of that same year, losses of assault guns jumped sharply to 49%, while tank losses were 38%. A machine ideal for defense and ambushes proved more vulnerable than a tank during a retreat, when the enemy appeared from unexpected directions, and turning the gun without turning the entire hull was impossible. In total, from 1940 to 1945, 12 separate assault gun batteries and 57 battalions and brigades were formed. The machine fought not only under the German flag, it was transferred to Germany's allies. Italy received 10 units, Spain 55, Bulgaria 67, Romania 40, Hungary also received its batch, and the most went to Finland, 120 machines, which the Finns used on the Karelian front against the Red Army. Such a wide circle of operators said a lot. The machine was simple enough that armies with completely different levels of technical training could master it. At the same time, the main mass of shells fired from the barrels of assault guns did not fly at tanks at all. Preserved statistics from 3 units on the Eastern Front for the period from December 1943 to May 1944 show that out of 315,280 expended shells, only 16.3% were fired at tanks and other armored targets. The remaining 83.7% fell on unarmored targets: infantry, artillery positions, machine gun points, vehicles, and buildings. The machine remained true to its original purpose, formulated back in the 1940 instruction, which stated that an assault gun is an offensive weapon and its main task is supporting infantry in an attack. It also noted that the machine lacks means for self-defense in close combat and must be covered by infantry, and engaging tanks should only be done for self-defense. But by 1942, the instruction was revised and officially recognized that the assault gun could be successfully used against enemy armored cars and light and medium tanks. Some of the most successful German armored vehicle commanders fought on assault self-propelled guns. By the way, the famous tank ace Michael Wittmann, whose name subsequently became a household word among military history enthusiasts, began his career specifically in the crew of a third-model assault gun. No, perhaps the most prominent figure among the aces of assault artillery was Bodo Sprans. He began the war as a commander of one machine, and thereafter his career developed with a dizzying speed that is possible only in war, where vacancies open every day. At the end of August and beginning of September 1943, on the Eastern Front, a company under Sprans's command destroyed 61 enemy tanks in 6 days of fighting. This was monstrous intensity. 6 days of continuous fire, constant maneuvering, and mortal risk. By September 17, 1943, Sprans brought his personal score to 76 knocked-out machines. Moreover, 4 of them he destroyed in close combat at distances where the crew could see the rivets on the enemy tank's armor. On that same day, he was wounded for the 9th time, and for the sum of his military merits, received oak leaves to the Knight's Cross. He was promoted to captain and transferred to the staff. He was 23 years old. In October 1943, already a first lieutenant, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross for 50 destroyed tanks and the successful actions of his unit. A 23-year-old officer, 9 wounds, 76 knocked-out machines, and one of Germany's highest military awards around his neck. In peacetime, an entire lifetime would have gone into such a career. But the war ended, and for people like Sprans, a completely different reality arrived. A decorated officer with combat experience found that his profession was no longer needed by anyone, and the awards for which he had shed blood 9 times could not even be worn now. Germany lay in ruins, and former military personnel had to find a place for themselves in civilian life again, starting literally from scratch. Sprans entered university, received a doctorate in ethnology, and became a museum director. A man who, at 23, commanded an armored vehicle company on the bloodiest front in history, found himself in the quiet academic world. Today, his name is well known to modelers around the world because manufacturers of assembly kits often use his specifically machines and figures in collectible series. The machine itself, low-slung and unremarkable, without an impressive turret and a fearsome silhouette, fought from the first to the last day of the war. Having survived all modernizations, all fronts, and all crises of the German military industry, people are accustomed to admiring the mighty tigers and elegant Jagdpanthers, but the main weight of daily battles fell on the shoulders of this inconspicuous workhorse, which cost less than a tank, fired more accurately than a tank, and in skilled hands proved more dangerous than a tank. If you like this story, give it a like. Write in the comments which piece of equipment to analyze next, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes.